China is set to be the first nation in the world to field an aircraft carrier to truly rival America's fleet of supercarriers. But how good is China's first attempt at a supercarrier? And why would a fight between the two likely end with China's brand new carrier becoming China's brand new coral reef? The United States has been operating aircraft carriers for over 100 years now, while China is relatively new to the carrier club. This gives the US a significant advantage over China when it comes to running carrier operations, which are notoriously a very tough and dangerous lesson for nations to learn. The United States earned its stripes through many years of very dangerous training and testing, losing many pilots and deck crew in the process. However, China has shown it's a quick learner and has yet to suffer a major naval deck accident. While the plan has lost numerous aircraft as it learns to operate its new aircraft carriers, it has the benefit of emulating the nation that does it the best, the United States. Lessons learned from observing US carrier ops has significantly decreased the learning curve and reduced the price in blood China has had to pay to gain proficiency. But China is far from matching the United States when it comes to operating the most advanced types of warships ever created. Aircraft carriers are floating airfields operating hundreds if not thousands of miles from home. They need to be able to launch very heavy aircraft at fast enough speeds to get them airborne, and recover them by bringing them in from takeoff speed to a stop in mere seconds. Anything more complex than a routine training exercise requires careful coordination of hundreds of personnel, and combat operations are something else altogether, with aircraft taking off and landing at the same time. A delicate ballet that the US has learned to perform expertly at a very high price in lives and aircraft lost. China has yet to show this capability, and while it has performed well in training cruises, it's yet to try the really hard stuff like combat-paced operations, such as launch and recovery at night and in inclement weather. The US Navy is an all-weather, 24-hour force trained to pressure an enemy relentlessly, giving no pause no matter how bad the weather is or how dark it gets. These types of carrier operations, however, are notoriously dangerous, and from time to time the US still manages to lose a plane or two. However, China has yet to attempt those more dangerous of carrier operations, and it remains to be seen how well its deck crews and pilots will perform when Mother Nature is beating down on them or in the dead of night. While they will likely learn to master inclement weather and nighttime ops, for now the US retains a significant advantage in this area. What about the physical ships though? How do the two match up? First, it's important to note that the very philosophy behind the use of carriers differs between the US and China. The United States sees its carrier as a global force capable of fighting and winning anywhere on the planet. If you start a mess, you can expect the US carrier off the shore of your country within 3 to 9 business days. China, however, is incapable of global power projection due to a lack of large surface combatants and global logistics capabilities. Thus, its aircraft carrier is instead meant for regional operations, never far from the shore or support of shore-based assets. This is good enough for now, when the greatest challenge the Type 003 might face is a fight against a US carrier strike group for the Malacca Strait. However, if China wishes to dethrone the US as a global superpower and impose its will upon the world, then the Type 003 is not the carrier for the job. China's Type 3 will be conventionally powered, which already places it at a massive disadvantage against a Ford-class American carrier. US carriers are nuclear-powered, which not only makes their range infinite but comes with a host of follow-on benefits. For instance, without the need for refueling, US carriers don't need their own dedicated oiler to keep them in the fight. This significantly reduces an enemy's ability to disrupt a US carrier by targeting support vessels. The Chinese Type 3, however, will require constant resupply, a link in the chain of Chinese naval operations that the US weapons are extremely well suited to breaking. Long-range stealth anti-ship missiles and the US's nuclear attack submarine fleet all pose deadly threats to support assets and will put pressure on China to fight more defensively than it would otherwise need to. The biggest advantage of the Ford's 2 powerful nuclear reactors, however, is their ability to generate more electricity than the ships need. This makes it possible to install future technology onto the ship without requiring a massive redesign or lengthy overhaul. The Type 03 doesn't have this capability and is largely stuck in the configuration it'll launch in. The US, meanwhile, is looking to soon add technology like directed energy weapons to its carriers and has more than enough juice to do so. US carriers are future-friendly. The Type 003 is not. However, this is hardly surprising. The Type 3 is China's first attempt at an indigenous carrier that can begin to match US capabilities. It's not a final design, so to speak, but rather one that'll influence the evolution of carrier design in the People's Liberation Army Navy. The Type 3 is also about 17 meters shorter than the Ford. at about 316 meters and a displacement of 80,000 tons versus the Ford's 333 meters and displacement of 100,000 tons. Mass is important in surface warfare because larger ships are simply more difficult to sink. As seen in U.S. naval live-fire exercises on decommissioned carriers, U.S. carriers are incredibly difficult to actually sink. In 2018, Rear Admiral Liu Yuan of the People's Liberation Army Navy stated that the U.S. was so afraid of casualties that China could solve its territorial dispute with Taiwan and neighboring nations by simply sinking 2 U.S. carriers. Liu said, quote, "We'll see how frightened America is after losing 10,000 sailors." Rear Admiral Yuan has clearly never heard of 2 things. The first, Pearl Harbor, and the second, a 2005 SINK-X, where the Navy tried to sink the decommissioned aircraft carrier the America. The carrier suffered 4 straight weeks of abuse of all kinds until she finally had to be scuttled by onboard demolition teams. However, it's important to note that the America was not being subjected to real weapons, but rather controlled explosives. The point of the testing was to see how to build better carriers to withstand combat damage, not to immediately sink her. However, not only did the America survive an intense battery of tests, but the Navy also took the lessons learned from the 2005 SINK-X and put them straight into the Ford. The USS America remains the only supercarrier to ever be sunk, and China is not privy to all the incredibly valuable information that the U.S. Navy gathered from such an unprecedented exercise. There's no doubt that at a fundamental design level, the Ford is simply better engineered than the Type 3. There is one big improvement the Type 3 enjoys that the Ford shares, and the Chinese likely stole it from the U.S. in the first place. While previous Chinese carriers employed ski-jump-style launch systems, the Type 3 will employ an electromagnetic catapult just like the Ford. This means China will finally be able to launch aircraft with full gas and combat loads, something it's unable to do aboard the Type 1 or Type 2. Electromagnetic catapults also significantly reduce complexity, decreasing maintenance and operating costs, as well as being able to be more finely tuned for various aircraft and payloads. This directly reduces stresses on the airframe and extends their service life. But how mature is Chinese technology over its American counterpart? Nobody knows, and the US has been having notorious difficulties with the Ford's catapult over the years that have taken time to iron out. China is standing on the US's shoulders and has been able to bypass a significant amount of research and development though. Aircraft are a carrier's primary weapon, and here China is definitely on the disadvantage. The Ford can carry up to 90 aircraft, with about 3/4 of them being combat aircraft. It's unknown how many the Type 3 will ultimately carry, but it's believed it'll carry about 40 fighters. This leaves the Type 3 outgunned against a Ford. But the types of fighters also matter, and once more China is on the disadvantage in this area too. In March of 2023, the USS Gerald R. Ford deployed with its full air wing for the first time, Carrier Air Wing 8. Currently, the Navy plans to operate its Ford-class carriers with a mixed complement of battle-tested F-18s and new F-35Cs. By working together, the F-35s will be able to dramatically increase the survivability and lethality of their non-stealthy counterparts, as the F-35 can act as a miniature airborne control platform, guiding weapons fired by non-stealth aircraft safely out of reach of the enemy to their targets. However, the Navy is well on track to fully operate F-35Cs from its aircraft carriers as production continues to ramp up. A flying supercomputer, the F-35C is an aircraft with no peer in the Chinese arsenal. Its stealth doesn't make it invisible, but instead makes it incredibly difficult to acquire a weapons-quality lock before it's already firing at you. This advantage alone makes it a lethal threat to Chinese air forces, but with its Block 4 upgrades, which will supercharge this already powerful fighter with a host of new electronic warfare capabilities, the F-35s will receive a capability no other fighter in the world can match: the ability to escort itself through skies filled with dense enemy radar networks. The upgraded AIM-260 air-to-air missile will not just neutralize China's only real current advantage, but overmatch it, with a range of at least 120 miles. The U.S. Navy will finally outrange the Chinese PL-15, which is estimated to have a range of about 100 miles. The F-35 will also carry the Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile Extended Range, a weapon specifically designed to take on China's anti-access area denial defense systems. Successfully tested against a moving target on December 8, 2022, the AAR-GMER can engage enemy radar systems from outside of their threat envelope, keeping its host aircraft safe. Even if the enemy turns off its radar, The AAR-GM-ER can use advanced digital modeling to locate its likely target and leverage onboard sensors to correctly identify a powered-down radar and destroy it. A missile believed to be China's new anti-radiation missile was spotted in 2020 under the wings of a J-11 fighter. However, little is known about its capabilities, though we do know that China lags significantly behind the US when it comes to sophistication of its weapon systems. The core of China's problem, though, comes from its carrier fighter, the J-15, nicknamed the Flying Shark. It's better known as the flopping fish in Chinese military media. The jet was based on a prototype Su-33 purchased from Ukraine, which the Chinese reverse-engineered, much to the chagrin of the Russians, who've watched China buy sample sizes of Russian tech only to reverse-engineer them and make their own versions. In effect, China made the Wish version of a Russian carrier fighter with predictable results. The J-15 suffers from a common problem that all Chinese jets face: bad engines. The Chinese utilize WS-10 engines built by Shenyang Liming Aircraft Engine Company, themselves copies of Russian Salyut-Lyutka AL-31FN engines. However, developing aircraft engines is an incredibly complicated endeavor, and the Chinese have not shown that they're quite up to par. As such, the WS-10 significantly limits the operational range and payload capacity of China's air fleets. Recently, a J-20 was shown in flight with testing models of the WS-15, an indigenous design meant to overcome significant shortcomings of the WS-10. On paper, the WS-15 seems set to deliver the kind of performance that the J-15 desperately needs if it's going to go toe-to-toe with American fighters. However, as China remains one of the most opaque nations in the world on military matters, it's unknown just how capable the WS-15 engine truly is. What is known is that Chinese engines are notoriously unreliable. One American pilot remarked at the surprise of Chinese pilots when he told them how he had performed a circumnavigation of the Earth with his F-16 without significant engine maintenance. While the lifespan of U.S. engines is measured in thousands of flight hours, Chinese engines are measured in the hundreds. The J-15 is also one of the chunkiest carrier fighters in the world, weighing in at 35,000 pounds versus the F-18 at 32,000 pounds. This is a significant problem when the plane is still stuck with inferior engines. With an estimated 60 J-15s in service, China also has a critical lack of combat-ready carrier planes to replace inevitable losses. The U.S. Navy currently has about 30 F-35Cs and 273 on order, with 512 F-18s ready to roll. When it comes to numbers, the U.S. is better suited to replace combat losses with better aircraft than China. But China is making strides toward developing the FC-31, a fifth-gen carrier-based fighter which has been spotted in flight testing. The U.S. has stated that once operational, the FC-31 will be a significant threat to fourth-generation U.S. aircraft, but it's unknown how it'll fare against U.S. F-35s. It's also unknown when exactly the FC-31 will enter production or how many the Chinese will acquire. What is known is that China is lagging significantly behind the U.S., with the American Navy already designing a sixth-generation carrier fighter. The Air Force version of a sixth-gen fighter, known as NGAD, has already been confirmed to be in flight, so by the time China fields the FC-31, it might find the brief parity it enjoyed quickly overshadowed by more capable U.S. aircraft. Ultimately, it's unknown which carrier would beat which in a one-on-one match, though overwhelmingly the signs point to a U.S. victory. With far more experience than China and more mature and better technology in most areas, the U.S. is simply the more competent combatant in this scenario. However, this is not a reason to diminish the threat that Chinese carriers can and will pose to U.S. forces, as China has proven it's a very quick learner. And while it may lag behind the U.S. technologically, the weapons China does field still present a significant threat. With only publicly available unclassified information to work with, the only way to know how each carrier would truly handle itself in battle would be for said battle to actually take place, a tragedy for the world at large as the planet's two biggest economic powers go to war. Now go check out what would it actually take to sink USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, or click this other video instead.